Hello and welcome to May's Q&A video. As with always, in these videos, I'll be answering all the questions that you guys leave in last month's Q&A comment section. So if you would like me to answer any questions you have, please feel free to leave it in the comments in this post on Patreon. And again, thank you for your support and let's get right into it. The first question comes from Christina, who asks, how do you develop your career as an illustrator? What would your advice be to someone who wants to do illustration full time? And I think this is a really good question, but also a tough one, right? So to answer the first part, how did I develop my career as an illustrator? So just to give a quick rundown, I began drawing really out of passion. I just kind of enjoyed drawing, not really to show off to anybody, because when I just started, I really just, as like everyone else, I have no followers, I have no platform, I don't really have anything to show off either, right? The work was kind of amateurish, mediocre. A lot of it was just like copying good images I liked and then, drawing it on paper. So it started off as a passion. And as I progressed to digital art and I have the full toolkit at my reach, right? I could use colors, I could use all the tools I have in Photoshop. I started taking more interest in improving my work. So so a core of my process or my journey really is this motivation to keep drawing and try to find a way to draw better, right? Create something better, create something cooler. And of course, along the way, as I slowly and genuinely, very slowly grew my audience, it also motivated me to be able to share these works that I created with others. So that is kind of the driving factor behind how I found energy and found it worth it to keep pursuing this, as I also gave up studying at university for this purpose of continuing to draw. So beyond that, I really cannot claim that I made any amazing, decisions, or I enrolled in a special course, or I read a magical book. Really, it's a long process of just doing what you love and trying your best to find time, making hard decisions if necessary, right? To provide that time and then focus your resources on improving your craft. And of course, I understand everyone has different circumstances and not everyone can find the time to do this. But, this is my journey and I'm very lucky to have been able to undertake it. And what advice would I give to someone who wants to do illustration full time? And I think one of the key things about illustration is that you have to create something that's very suitable for presentation, right? So what you want to avoid is very concept art type of things. As I noticed that you want to be an illustrator, not a concept artist, right? So you have to create things that are very polished and or at least aim towards that, right? Aim to look at a whole skill set you need to be an illustrator and the kind of works you need to produce as an illustrator, and then go in and really just continually practice, build upon your own works, right? Get a little bit better every single time. And it's just a really long and slow process, right? Unfortunately, I wish I could say, oh, there's a magical way to be great at this, but really it's also just practice, right? And if you want to progress to full-time, it's almost also the same answer. You have to slowly build up your skill to the point where your work is at a glance, right? People can tell that you're skilled, you know what you're doing, your fundamentals are in place, you're drawing dynamic images. And then secondly, you have a platform, right? And almost always nowadays, I realize that platform is pretty much guaranteed by skill. And the reason I'm saying this is because over the years, I've seen a lot of great artists who just join a new platform, right? They did not make like massive announcements or keep plugging it, right? They just joined a new platform and they just started, posting stuff. And within like 2 months, they'll immediately go to like 200, 300,000 followers. And it's my understanding or my guess is that really, when you have images that are very attractive and you display your own skill, your own creativity, and your ability to present an idea that is very enjoyable for people to look at immediately, right? Your conversion rate, like every click essentially almost always transfer to a follow. And in that sense, your platform will grow, and as your platform grows, your skill, by right, should also be growing as you keep growing, and really they just feed each other, right? And to a point where you have built these up enough, I would say it then becomes easier and easier to find job opportunities, career opportunities, and be able to sustain this full time. Of course, as a last note, right, there's always a disclaimer. I am really not a career coach, right? I'm just trying to share my understanding of things and what I feel is the focus, right? So final reiteration, my advice would be to focus on drawing what you love, drive yourself with your own motivation, put in time as much as possible if you're very serious about wanting to turn this into a career, and just don't stop, right? Don't stop, don't give up, right? As long as every single work is slightly better than the old one, you've improved in something, you've learned something, you've practiced something, then is progress forward. And I really want to encourage people to not give up and put the time into it. And eventually, I think it's really not a matter of luck. There is, of course, some luck, but I feel it's mostly a matter of time until a very consistent artist who is improving will get noticed. So that is it. Quite a long answer. And moving on to the next question, Timothy asks, how long do I take on average to complete a piece? Of course, he knows that sometimes different pieces can take different amount of time, and he feels it takes a long time to finish an illustration, and from hourly rate, this could look bad, right? And if he tries to speed up, of course, naturally, not the quality would not be as good. And so, to answer the question, I usually take about 12 to 15 hours. It's really difficult for me to say because I don't keep track, right? I just work on it naturally, right? I don't look at the clock. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's only 2 hours, and I'm at this point, I'm too slow. I don't think about that at all, right? I just jump in, draw. If there's problems, solve it, right? If it's not interesting enough, brainstorm about what elements I can add, what elements are getting in the way, and then we deal with that, and then we polish things up to the point where we're somewhat satisfied, take a break, come back a little bit later, and kind of just repeat this process. And so generally, I find it takes about 12 to 15 hours in 2 or 3 sittings. I'm only saying this really just to provide a frame of reference, right? Because I do not want people getting the wrong impression that, I'm sitting down and I'm just churning out this huge portrait in 1 hour, and oh my goodness, like the speed paint is just as fast as I do it in real life, or things like that, right? I don't want people to have any misconceptions. There is a process that I have to go through. Sometimes it can be very long, right? I remember the longest piece I did, I think, was about 120 hours. It took me a whole week drawing every single day for really, really long because it was such a difficult piece and I kept messing up. I couldn't just put it down. Right. It's really, really, actually, I don't think it was 120. That's a bit too ridiculous. I think it was 105, right? Yeah, it was very long. It was 18 hours a day. I basically, anything other than sleeping, right, I just spent doing the piece. But that really just goes to show it can vary, right? And I do not want people to be thinking that time is somehow indicative of anything, right? Just really focus on the final product, because if you think about it, if you create a piece that's really good, it's going to get you a lot of leverage, no matter if you're looking for new fans or you want potential employers, right? That thing's going to sit in your portfolio for years and it's going to get you lots and lots of business. So what is the difference if you spend 15 hours on it versus 50 hours on it? If you can create a 50-hour work that sits there for 5,000 hours, right? It's super worth it. So please do not worry about the hours. You just want to practice your skill, and as you practice your skill, eventually it just becomes easier and easier to do certain things, and every time you do it again, the process becomes easier. And eventually you'll naturally be fast, right? And when you're naturally fast, you can take on more jobs and etc., right? As Timothy is worried about, the hourly rate. So I don't recommend, trying to catch yourself up to hourly rate, but to paint and practice until you're comfortable and then let the hourly rate work for you. Right, and this also means you can charge at a normal hourly rate, right? But you're actually drawing 3 times faster, but you're not also stressing yourself because that's essentially your natural speed. So in conclusion, you just want to focus on drawing, creating good works, maximizing the quality, and then the speed will come with time, right? Don't worry about the speed at all. Of course, Paul had a question the month before, and he has another one this time. And he says how to render materials or guide to show material information. And he feels that his drawings do not have enough texture. Now that is an excellent question, right? Because a lot of times I also face the same problem. I focus on painting values, I focus on capturing surfaces, and then there's a point in the drawing where I'm like, okay, most of the things are in place, but everything looks like they're made of plastic, in a sense, right? The texture isn't there, or rather the micro textures aren't there, right? I could draw the folds and make it recognizably something like cloth, right? But to finish the touches on it, right? To put in the final touch, right? He feels like the drawings are really smooth and lacking in texture. So that's a great question. And my answer to that is really kind of focus on the light and dark area, right? How do I put it? Let me try something here. Let's say we draw a circle and then let's say we have a gray ball here, right? And now, of course, this looks really, really, really smooth. And now, how do we add texture? So let me pull up. Right, so for example, let's say we have this gray ball here. And because this particular ball isn't colored very brightly, generally speaking, we do not get issues of overexposure, and we're able to see the texture more in areas of light, right? So just doing something very simple like this, right? This is basically like a tiny dots scatter brush. And then immediately, as you can see, without even touching the shadows, right? We can just add a bit of dots to the light, make sure the highlighted area is also has the texture applied to it, and then immediately you can see now we have some kind of like stone ball, right? We have a stone ball, and we have created the effect and stopped it from feeling smooth. And the reason I use this example is because of how we apply our textures, right? Let's say if I apply textures to the back here, it really isn't visible, and even when it's visible, it kind of looks off, right? Because generally speaking, in shadows, we don't have a lot of light, and because of that, the micro textures and the micro reflections don't happen a lot. So to conclude, answer is to step 1, determine the lighting. Right, determine the lighting. 2, add textures to key areas. Right, and key areas being, generally speaking, areas that are well lit. However, right, if you have something that is too well lit, right, you have something that's too well lit, like this ball here, right? Let's say this is a very, say, a white concrete ball, right? You'll notice that the highlights are no longer quote unquote textured, right? So rather than, forcibly trying to add texture into the highlighted area like this, right, it just looks weird. Leave the highlight as it is, very untextured, and then focus your textures on this transition zone, where also a lot of the texture is very visible because of how the light is not undersaturated and also not overexposed. That's where the texture shines through the most, right? So kind of follow these rules and add textures accordingly to these areas. And as a bonus, I'll be sharing this particular texture brush in the comments below, or rather in the description below. Right, so I'll be sharing this brush. Please keep an eye out for it if you're interested. And moving on to the next question from Lillian. Thank you, Lillian. I really appreciate it. And she asked about shortcuts in the drawing process on Photoshop. And I think that is a really, really important thing that I think I actually haven't really talked about a lot, right? Shortcuts are amazing, really, really amazing. For example, right now I'm scrolling here with spacebar and I'm zooming in and out when I hold Alt spacebar. So this immediately allows me to navigate very quickly around the image. Right now I'm doing this video, it's also very helpful, right? Because I can zoom into this part, I can zoom into that part. That's just an example of how shortcuts can really help you. So excellent question, and I will be doing a video on what shortcuts are probably helpful to have and to practice when we use Photoshop. Thank you again, Lillian. And next question from Taylor. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. And he or she asks if there are any books I use to learn stuff like anatomy, lighting, and composition. And as always, I always like to refer to people to Frame Ink. The book itself isn't very technical in the sense that it's not very academic. Even though it provides some very, very good basic information. And then the main draw of the book, I think, is really how it shows how much you can do with very few values and great composition and perspective, right? I think the images in that really wows me on a very regular basis. I'm like, okay, this is really good, and it motivates me to figure out more. So I would recommend Frame Ink in general for lighting and composition. And for anatomy and how to draw and paint the body, that's a bit of a tougher question because personally I have not really read up on any kind of proper academic books on anatomy. Mostly I use a mix of observation from real life and from photographs to kind of figure out how the muscles and the body behaves, what kind of gestures it's capable of. So in general, I cannot really recommend a book for anatomy specifically, but I think a generally good guideline, right, is to observe, right? Because when we're doing anatomy, we're generally trying to capture a good portion of reality, even if it's stylized, right? So a great way to do it is to observe and then to apply, right? And that I think also applies to these two as well, because if you read a book once and you think, oh, it's great, right, and then you just forget about it, you're not going to learn anything. And even let's say you look at a book once and you put all that you read into an image and then you don't do it again next time, it also isn't really helpful. So I think, right, you really want to repeat the cycle of observing, whether it be key rules or great information in a book. You want to observe and absorb that. Same thing with anatomy, right? Like, let's say you need help drawing an arm, and then you look up and you find a great gesture that you're looking for, and then you also figure out the volume and the structure of the arm, and you observe that, and then you apply that, and you want to repeat this process, right? Observe, remember, apply, right? Every time you draw, use reference, and when you use reference, make use of this. And I can only say that I feel that has helped me quite a bit. And that's of course not to say that you shouldn't, look for anatomy books, or if you find a good anatomy book, you shouldn't bother with it. I think it's also great, and it's probably something I will also have to look into in the future as well. And the next question from Moheri. They ask, when I add color to a piece, does that using a soft light layer, right? Doesn't that screw the values initially set up? And how do I not make that happen? Right, so I've actually answered Moheri in a comment. So quickly to let everyone know, right, just in case you're also curious about this question, on a soft light layer is a bit special. Soft light layer is a bit special because compared to multiply or linear light or screen, right, it's range is actually covering from 0 all the way to 100. So let's talk about multiply, right? Let's say we have a circle here of value 50, right? Excuse me. This is just a regular circle. And let's say we take a soft light layer of value 50, right? As you can see here, if we take a soft light layer of value 50 to it, and I'm painting over it, it doesn't do anything, right? It genuinely does not do anything. And I'm painting over it really hard. And if I isolate the soft light layer, you can see this is what I've painted, but it does not apply to the circle. Like the values don't change at all. And the reason being that soft light actually does not have an effect on value when it's set at 50. Of course, as you notice, if I pull it up to say 77, it changes the value. And if I pull it down to 16, it changes the value, right? You can see that it's effect at 16 and at 77. So that is the reason why I find soft light very helpful for this process, because generally speaking, sometimes you have values that are a little bit too dark for their color, and sometimes you have values that are too bright for their color. So you can apply color and lighten at the same time, right? So now if I feel like this is still too dark, I can even crank it up to 84, right? It's very flexible. So that is why I recommend soft light, and this is how you can avoid screwing with values, right? But generally, I wouldn't say the values themselves are very, very important. I won't say that the relationship between values are what you're trying to preserve. So in conclusion, don't worry about it too much, and then use soft light layer flexibly, right? To both adjust the value and the color simultaneously. And it's really good to have it for an early pass. And now the last question from official Biopan. They ask, when I first began educating myself on values, specifically materials with various reflective properties, how do I go about studying them? And so I think a first thing I want to say is that every material, right, almost every material has reflective properties, because that's how we see things, right? We see things when the light enters our eyes, and we judge based on that what we're actually looking at. So immediately we have to understand that reflective properties is very much related to exactly the volume and the structure of the thing we're looking at, right? So let's say we have like a flat piece of metal that's facing right at us, and it's super, super smooth. And what happens is that we just have a very, very clear reflection of what's going on, and that's what we call a mirror. So understanding that it's a mirror, for example, really helps us a lot, because now that we know that it has a very smooth surface, it reflects light very completely. It also reflects maximal light, right? So we shine a torchlight, the mirror is going to shine right back at us. And that is kind of how metals and polished metals like chrome also work. It's basically a giant mirror. Now compared to other things like, say, skin, right? Skin is more diffuse. There are tiny little bumps and textures on the skin. And then when the light hits it, it goes this way, and then it goes that way, and then it goes this way, and it just goes everywhere, right? Because in this micro texture, right? In this micro texture zone, we have a surface that's something like this. Right? So that's what we call very diffusely lit objects, right? Very diffuse lighting being reflected by objects like wood, skin, and basically any other thing, right? For example, things like plastic behaves a lot closer to something like a mirror or steel, in that it is very, very reflective and it's very smooth, right? And of course, there's a lot more I can go into this topic, but my advice with people struggling with this is to understand what material and why it does certain things, right? And then you can immediately and have a much easier time telling what's going on. So if you know that you're drawing a wooden cabinet, and you keep in mind that wood has a very rough surface and it doesn't reflect like a mirror and it diffuses light that hits it, you want to look at it as something with that property, and rather emulating a magical wood preset, right? You just want to make sure you show that the lighting is diffuse, give viewers cues like color or patterns to tell them it's wood, and then personally I feel that it's really just good enough. And of course, at the same time, right, let's say you have a wood that is freshly waxed, etc., and then you can make it closer to a mirror, give it some very sharp reflection highlights. And that is how I feel we should approach materials, right? And how do I go about studying them is also, again, a matter of observation, right? You want to observe and you want to apply. And with Google Images nowadays, or any really other search engines that gives you images, I think it's really quick and really easy to find a good sample of objects, look at them, and observe carefully how they reflect light and how they not reflect light, right, in certain cases. So that's my personal recommendation. Observe and apply and understand why each material does certain things. And that is all the questions for this month's Q&A. If you feel like you want to ask me a question that will take a bit longer to reply to, as I normally try my best to reply to all questions that you guys ask, you can put it in the comment section in this post, and I will answer all the questions in the comment section in this post in next month's video. And so thank you again for your support, and see you guys next month.